Hello and welcome to the All About Pigeons podcast. We have a very special episode for you today, so stick around. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about Fantails with Andrew Kerns. Andrew got his first pigeons when he was 4 years old, and 38 years later, pigeons are still playing a role in his life. He is a master breeder recognized by the National Pigeon Association, as well as the Eastern Fantail Club of America and Central Fantail Club of America. He is one of three to ever achieve 3 Master Breeder Awards for Fantails. He has been involved in color genetics and has spent decades working on developing new colors in Fantails. Most notable is the frill stencil colors. Over the years, he has held multiple offices in several Fantail clubs as well as his all-breed club. Andrew was the NPA state rep for Virginia for some years. He has done extensive judging assignments, judging every major show in North America, some multiple times, and was the first foreign judge for the Saudi Fantail Club. Next summer, he will judge 2 shows in South Africa. His birds and bloodlines are spread around the world and bred in 17 countries and on 4 continents. Andrew, thanks for coming on and talking Fantails with us today.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
How did you get started with Fantails? Was that one of the first breeds that you got into?
No, so like the vast majority of us, I think most people when they start in pigeons, either they have barn pigeons or commies, or you get your hands on some homers or some rollers. And in my case, my older brother and I got some rollers when I was just 4 years old. And we had a little kit box and played with them for a number of years. I saw my first fancy pigeons when I went to the State Fair of Virginia, and they had a pigeon show as part of the state fair. And I saw my first fantails and other fancy breeds. My brother and I had a little of everything in those days, and we begged and pleaded, and my parents said, absolutely not. If you get rid of some stuff, maybe next year, if you're still interested, maybe we'll look at the fantails. Waited a year, fair came around again, begged and pleaded, and we landed up meeting a gentleman that lived only about 10 minutes from the house that was showing fantails at the state fair, and his name was Claude Ziegler, and he became the mentor slash grandfather that I never had. We were best of friends, and he taught me everything he knew about fantails, and I spent a lot of time with him in those early years, learning about the breed and showing, and was really a huge inspiration for me. So it was at age 12 that I actually got involved with breeding and showing fantails.
Excellent. Yeah, and there's that key again too. You hear about having a mentor and how helpful that really is when you first get started.
Absolutely.
So can you talk to us a little bit about the history and the origin of this breed?
Yeah. So fantails are one of the handful of really, really old breeds where there's no definitive start. The oldest pigeon literature mentions them. It's commonly believed that they were first developed in the Middle East. The first fantails that were documented that came to Europe via India through the Dutch traders. By the 1700s, you had fantails in Europe, and most notably England, where they started really trying to develop them into similar to what they are. By the 1800s, they had kind of a rough version of what we have today. By the 1840s, the first fantails had been imported into the U.S. from England, and they continued to do so till about the 1910 to 1915 range. They were still importing some birds, and the first clubs were being formed around that time here in the U.S. The Eastern Fantail Club, of which I'm an officer, was founded in 1896, making them the second oldest specialty club in the United States. We just celebrated our 125th anniversary show year before last. So fantails have a long history. They're known all around the world. A lot of old literature mentions them, but it was really, you have to credit the English in particular as kind of forming them into what we kind of recognize as a fantail today.
Since you do judging internationally, is there much difference between what the standard is in other countries and what the standard is here?
There was at one time they kind of developed independently in different parts of the world. And even in Europe, if you look at fantails from, say, the 1970s to the early 80s, like what was shown in Germany, which is considered, one of the hotbeds of pigeons, the quality and the style of birds was very different than the United States. The US breeders in particular and the Canadian breeders did a fantastic job of developing the birds closer to the standard. So in the mid 1980s, a lot of North American birds went back to Europe and continued to do so for quite a stretch. So now you go to Europe and the birds are just the same as the States. If you go to Saudi Arabia, the birds are just the same. Like if I travel and when I'm judging these shows, if I didn't know what's outside the show hall, what city I was in, you'd swear it's just a show here in the States. The quality is very, very similar due to all the exports from North America around the world. A lot of the other countries adopted the US standard or became districts to some of the US clubs. So there's a lot of uniformity around the world as far as the type and style and level of quality.
This bird has pretty exaggerated features. It's pretty unique in a lot of different ways. And so as a judge and someone who's been breeding these for a while, can we first kind of just talk about some of these features that they have, and maybe even talk about a little bit of what you have to do for show prep for getting these birds ready for a show.
Sure, sure. Obviously, the most notable feature people would say would be the tail, and then the posture would probably be a close second. A lot of people ask me, do they always stand like that or do they sleep like that? And the answer is no. But yeah, I always kind of liken it to a show dog where you have like a posture. Like a German Shepherd doesn't stand that way all the time, but when he's in the show ring, he's got a certain posture and legs got to be a certain way. And the fantails are the same way. You bring out that natural inclination to show by working with them, but they're pretty much hatched with it. Interestingly enough, anatomically, if you looked at a skeleton of a fantail next to a skeleton of a roller or a homer, the only physical difference is the last tailbone, the caudal tailbone, is slightly lengthened because of the shape of the rump on a fantail. But that extreme posture and shape and everything that you see on it is all ligaments and attitude. There's really no anatomical difference. It's just all bred into them, that posture.
Yeah, they look a lot different than a roller or a homer when you
They absolutely do. They do. It's mostly feather, but it's a lot of selective breeding.
yeah.
They're quite a complicated breed because you have so many different parts to them, and the fact that you're so far away from the standard normal wild type, roller or homer body shape and posture. There's a lot that can not go right with them as far as the head setting. They have to keep their head straight, and if they look to one side, that's not good, or if the feet aren't square. It's a contrast of extremes to produce a really good quality fantail. And then, unlike most breeds where you have a standard and it says 10 points for head and 20 points for body and whatever, the fantail standard has a performance section. So not only do they have 80 points for structure, but 20 points of the standard is how the bird physically performs. So they are considered a performing breed, just like a roller or a parlor roller or what have you. They have to perform a certain way in order to be graded properly. And if they don't perform correctly, then you're going to have a bird that's deficient.
Is that something that you kind of deal with in training? I guess getting like that's a breed that you would really have to show, get in a show cage and really train a lot with.
Yes, you spend quite a bit of time working with them, getting them very calm, used to being handled. They're always judged in communal cages, large walking pens. So they need to be used to being around strange birds, a lot of noise, We always use fluorescent lights on the cages. So training involves having a similar setup at home, maybe a radio in the room, for some background noise, and then lots of handling, lots of lacing of the tails, show prep, that kind of stuff.
Can you talk about the lacing of the fan of the tail?
Yeah. There's a few videos on YouTube that kind of describe the process, but essentially what you're doing is you're taking all the feathers and first you separate them all if they're tangled or overlapped, and you smooth them all out in a specific order. And then you're doing the actual art of lacing is you split the feather right at the base, the webbing, the think of like a feather is almost like Velcro where they have hooks and that lock feather veins together. So you would take your thumb and ever so slightly make a little split in the webbing and push part of the feather behind the feather that's above, leaving a little tiny piece at the base of the feather to hold it. And what it does is it locks those feathers into place. So instead of a bird with 35 loose feathers, just kind of, all over the place, it locks it into almost like that dinner plate shape with a little bit of massaging, a little twisting and smoothing and bending, whatnot. You can get a really flat, uniform, nice shaped tail. So there's a big showmanship side to fantails. Again, it's not just breeding a good one and that's good enough. It's the training and the showmanship, making sure the bird's trained, you got the tail laced. It all kind of goes hand in hand, making them really one of the more challenging show breeds.
Well, I mean, yeah, the lacing of the tail, clearly you have to handle that bird before it's showtime because that sounds like some delicate work.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And you need to know every bird, every tail has trouble spots or something that needs to be corrected.
Mhm.
You almost never will have a perfect natural tail. So knowing in advance what each bird needs, making notes. So when you're at the show getting ready to have the bird judged, you kind of know, okay, well, it's got a little trouble spot here. I need to make sure this is correct, which is it's interesting because the Indian fantails, it's against their standard, and they voted not to do it. They want the birds as is. They allow you to smooth the feathers and layer them, but not lock them together.
Oh,
So
interesting.
it's interesting that we go on different ends of the spectrum on that.
Being a bird that it gets handled a lot, are they a pretty docile bird or are they kind of wily?
Very, very, very docile. I have to be very careful when I'm in my pens because they won't get out the way. You don't want to step on someone. They're all up underneath your feet. They're very calm. People that visit the loft and look at the pens, they kind of laugh and say they're kind of like little bumper cars because they will. They're all running around on the floor. Specifically, fantail lofts really shouldn't have a lot of perches or especially anything up high. The more the birds fly, the more the tail is going to be scooped, and you want a flat, nearly flat tail. So all my lofts have no perches at all. So it's just lots of floor space. So
Okay.
when you walk in a pen and there's, 50 in a pen just all running around. And they're very calm, and because they're handled quite a bit, especially to show birds, they're really good for kids because they're easy to pick up and easy to handle.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So your loft setup, you have like, so everything's on the ground then food, water, nest bowls.
Yeah. So I breed in individual cages. So my
Okay.
main loft has big open pens that I keep my cocks and hens separate, and I have pens for young birds during the breeding season that are just holding pens. And then I have individual breeding cages, especially with the genetic work with the colors. You really need to have good pedigrees, good records, and breeding in an open loft, you could, slip up. There could be some mistakes made. So
Yeah.
having one pair per cage, ensuring the parentage is more ideal for what I do. So with the fantails, I keep 50 pair in individuals, which is a lot of little cups of food and water every day to change. And even then, they're just large cages with a nest bowl in the corner. There's no perches or anything in the cages. So really
Okay.
my birds don't get an opportunity to fly much at all.
I mean, how much can they really fly?
As a kid, I've had a few get away from me, showing friends in the neighborhood or whatever. And I can honestly say they can get up to the roof of the house with a little bit of effort. So they're not going to be setting any records. Or you're not going to have a kid of fantails flying around the roof of the house. But if they try hard enough, yeah, they could get up into a tree or up on a roof with a little effort. It's like trying to fly with a parachute behind you. It's a bit of a task for them.
I bet. So when it comes to the breeding, and we spoke with Spud about the Indian fantails, and we talked a little bit about the trimming of the fantails. What's the process for trimming the fantails for the standards, and getting those guys ready?
It's going to be very similar. So, to ensure the fertility rate, which is not great, various studs and strains of fantails have different fertility rates. But for me, if I'm like 65, 70% for a year, that's good for me. Where, most breeds are nearly 100%. You need to trim the sides. At least I try and basically just leave a little bit in the middle to kind of mimic the width of like a roller or a homer. So like 3 or 4 feathers wide right in the middle. And everything on the sides comes off. Trim it as tight as I can. And then I trim the fluff around the vent because fantails tend to be kind of fluffy in that area and longer feathered to try and ensure as much fertility as I can. There's pairs that can get it done with no trimming at all. It's just, I don't want to take the time to wait and see, give them a few rounds to see. And, it's all about production. Raising a good fantail is not easy, like a real top show quality bird. Your rate of getting a really good one, like in my stud, is maybe 1 out of 20 is really nice. So you don't
Oh,
want to
okay.
waste time waiting to see if the fertility is there.
Do you ever have to foster?
I do. I don't foster all of them. So, for example, I breed from usually 50 pair of fantails, and I'll keep 15 pairs of rollers in a feeder loft, and I'll foster out eggs here and there. But it's not a necessity. Fantails are very good parents for the most part. The fertility is not wonderful, but they're very attentive parents for the most part. They feed the babies really well. Never had an issue with that. Not like a short faced breed that may physically have limitations on feeding babies. So,
Right.
that's fantails are really good parents.
And I'm just curious because I hear different people have different breeds for fosters. What kind of drew you to using rollers for foster parents?
So I've had homers in the past and they ate a little too much for my liking. um, and then because I'm into working with genetics and the rare colors, I had the opportunity to get some rollers and frill stencil and some of the odd colors. And I thought, well, it cost as much to feed 15 pair of blue checkers as it would 15 pair of almonds and stencils and all these rare,
Mm,
pretty colors. So I kind of that fed that curiosity and that passion for working with colors in a group. And rollers, of course, are easy as can be to breed. You don't have to do much to raise a bunch of them. So, just a variety of colors and playing with them on the side gives kind of a vibrant group of feeders instead of just your normal kind of standard colored birds.
okay. Can you talk a little bit about some of the color work that you're doing with these fantails? I know that you're really into the genetic side of it there.
Yeah, it started, well, it's way back. So you got to picture I'm in at the time 7th grade, and so that would be middle school, and we're in science class, and we're studying in life science Gregor Mendel, and pea pods, and learning the basics of genetics with doing a Punnett square and plugging in your genes. Well, lo and behold, at the same time, I'm in getting into pigeons, and a friend in my local Albury club loaned me a copy of Joe Quinn's Pigeon Breeder's Notebook, which is kind of the the gateway for most of us genetics breeders. That's the first book that was really written on the subject at the time. And it just fascinated me. I was learning about it in school. And then I was like, well, I can use that same principles towards my pigeons. And oh, well, that's how you can make this color or that color. You just need one of this and one of that. And this is how it works. And it took all the mystery out of how to get the colors. So
Hmm.
that's where I kind of got the bug for it. And then down the road, I started meeting some guys that had done some breed crosses and really worked with some new genes that weren't in fantails. So my first real project was I crossed Argent Modinas into fantails to get the toy stencil gene, and was pretty successful at that, building a family of birds off of that. And then after that, I started with some reduced and barless, which weren't in the breed at the time, and even brown. Just the regular brown pigment wasn't in fantails up until the 1980s. And then, most notably, I worked with a group that we called ourselves the Gene Pool, and it was a group of fantail guys that were all about working with colors, and we all worked with the frill stencil for a number of years. And there's still a couple of us still hanging in there, but it's been 1992 was the original cross from Oriental frill to a fantail, and here we are all these years later. They're quite beautiful and getting developed nicely. And that's really the one that people really gravitate to as far as the rare colored fantails, because frill stencil is a very, very, very complicated and difficult gene to transfer when you have to worry about the posture and the body shape and the tail,
Right.
that sort of thing. It's much easier if you were to put it on a roller or a racing homer and you didn't have to worry about all the other stuff. So it took nearly a decade to get something that even looked like a half breed fantail in frill stencil, and then it took another decade to get something that looked like a very poor quality fantail in a frill stencil. So it's very slow. You're talking, it was a group of us that raised hundreds upon hundreds over these years, and we would trade the very best of what we had extra with each other to kind of help each other along. And they've come an amazing long way. And then we started spreading them around, and now they're all over the Middle East and even Asia now. I sent some to Bangladesh, and they're in India and
Wow.
yeah, South Africa. So it's kind of neat to see something that you had a hand in as far as developing, and it's literally, you could see the descendants all around the world. But the drill stencils are definitely the big one. Another one I'm working on pretty hard is ice. The same color as a damascene or an ice pigeon. A friend of mine spent about 20 years working on it, and when he decided to hang it up with fantails and get out of pigeons, he asked me to take the last five pair that he had to kind of carry on. And I've had a good time, though. I guess it's been about 8 years now, trying to bring them up to type and working with them. And they're not quite as hard as the frill stencils, but they're definitely challenging and a very beautiful color. Fantails in particular, I always say that they're in the pigeon world, fantails are one of the best canvases to use for a color geneticist, because you have that huge tail, you have all those feathers, that are on display. So they really do make a good canvas for developing these colors. You don't have to spread the tail out to see the expression. It's right there, prancing around. So
That's so cool. I mean, it's what I really enjoy is, just the variety of pigeons that we have through selective breeding. And here we are today, I mean, thousands of years later, and the breeds are still being manipulated through selective breeding and changing and enhancing them. And, we can still play that role. That's really cool.
it is. And a lot of it goes back to the organizations that support these breeds. They update the standards, and the members, get together. And the last revision on Fantails was 2006. It's nice to kind of keep setting goals for the breed and all breeds and continue to change them and watch them evolve for various reasons. Yeah, it's really a fascinating thing.
So you've been a member of the different fantail clubs here in the States. There's the Eastern Fantail Club and the Central Fantail Club. And you also judge internationally. Other international clubs as well?
Yep. So fantails are one of the few breeds that's fortunate enough in North America, a healthy enough breed to have a lot of regional clubs. For example, like frillbacks that I raise. There's the American Frillback Club, and that's pretty much caters to the breed in the US and in North America. Where the fantails, there's the Eastern Fantail Club, the Western Fantail Club, the Central Fantail Club, the Mid America Fantail Club. The
Wow.
Great Lakes Fantail Club sponsors the show at Louisville for the National Youngbird Show. And then there's this very strong club in Canada, the Central Canadian Fantail Club. So we all tend to cooperate and we'll have combined shows and we work more together in recent years. But the breed's healthy enough that there's quite a few regional clubs. So we don't have one national club as opposed to we still have quite a few regional clubs. And most of us are members of multiple clubs or all of them. And then the overseas clubs are usually affiliated with the North American clubs. Like the European clubs are all districts of the Central Fantail Club of America due to if you've ever seen the European shows or read about them, like Nuremberg or Leipzig in Germany, the
Yeah.
big VP shows, the shows are judged prior to the opening of the show to the public, right? And all the birds are judged in their cages. And the day before the show opens to the public, everything's judged and you have a catalog. Well, if you think about that, if the exhibitors aren't allowed in there, then that's not really how we do fantails, right?
Oh,
That's an
right.
opposite. So, in order for the European organizations to allow that break in tradition, to allow the exhibitors to prepare their own birds and have a show set up like the typical North American way, they have to be affiliated with the North American clubs. So that's why the European fantail breeders are all that group is affiliated with the Central Fantail Club of America. They're districts of that particular club to allow them to have separate shows and have the exhibitors prepare their birds and judge them in a communal pen per the North American standard. But the Saudi club is very vibrant and been going for, I guess they've been around about 15 years or so. Strong clubs. There's a nice group of guys in Australia that I'm friendly with and the South Africans as well. And the Middle East has become a hotbed of pigeon activity and fantails, especially the last say 2 decades or so. It's really growing.
Will you be showing your birds at the NPA National up in Oklahoma this year?
This year, probably not. We have there's a big fantail show about 2 weeks before
Hmm.
in Indiana, and I'm in the East Coast in Virginia. So in 2022, no, 2021 was the last year the NPA went to Amarillo. I drove, what was it, 25 hours from Central Virginia to Amarillo, Texas to show my birds. So I've made the trip out west for the NPA. That was like 1,550 miles each way.
Wow.
That was a long trip. But this year, probably not. The NPA's been nice enough that they've kind of had some eastern half of the US shows in recent years. Like,
Right.
for example, I was at Myrtle Beach. And then, of course, this last year in Louisville, Kentucky, I've shown at multiple when they did in the Northeast, like Springfield, Massachusetts, Hartford, Connecticut, and then the multiple ones in Lancaster. Pennsylvania. But Oklahoma City, that's quite a hike. That's about a 22 and a half, 23-hour drive for me. And 2 weeks after a major show, I'm probably going to sit this one out.
Yeah, I get it. That's a drive. Out here on the West Coast, we appreciate it that they move around a little bit and kind of come closer
Yeah.
for us. It makes it, on the other side of it, a little bit easier to get to. So,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you can't please everyone, but I
right.
think
Yep.
really if the NPA does a good job of moving the site around every few years, so everyone gets an opportunity in different
Yeah,
parts of the.
absolutely. Well, we're coming up against the clock, but Andrew, thanks for coming on and talking with us. You've been a wealth of information and really appreciate you sharing it all with us.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me on.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the All About Pigeons podcast. Please help the pigeon hobby by telling your fellow club members or other pigeon friends about the podcast, and make sure to leave a good review or at least a 5-star for the podcast wherever you listen. If you have a topic or a person you want to hear more about on the podcast, or if you yourself would like to be a guest, just send an email to allaboutpigeonspodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.